So thank you all so much for coming for this second concurrent session, looking at the preview of the new BredWell FedWell, or as we like to say, the entree to BredWell FedWell. So the process of redeveloping this program began in 2020, where Shoosters Consulting, who are based just outside of Dubbo, New South Wales, won the contract to redevelop the program and to deliver over the next 5 years. At the moment, we are currently going through all of the content review and just finalising exactly what the new BredWell FedWell is going to look like. And two of the members that are integral in this are Karis Cornwall and Chris Merrims. So Chris is a farm management consultant based in Albury, New South Wales. He has over 30 years of experience working in the sheep and cattle industry, and he's been a very strong supporter of BredWell FedWell since its inception. He's sat on multiple high-level positions, including the chair of Sheep Producers Australia, the deputy chair of RMAC. He was the chair of Evergraze. He also sat on the board of MLA and also was instrumental in the development of the sheep industry sustainability framework. So we're very, very lucky to have him here and to be working on this new BredWell FedWell program. Karis Cornwall, who you may also know as Karis Jones, is a farm management consultant and a genetic legend for MLA, based in Holt Rock, WA. Until last year, she did work with MLA, and now she is working with Shoosters Consulting and has been instrumental in the redevelopment of the new BredWell FedWell. She's been in the industry her whole life, as she grew up on a sheep property in WA. So really looking forward to having this entree of BredWell FedWell. Like I said yesterday, this is a world first look at what the new program is going to look like, and how we're going to be moving forward with our flagship genetic one-day event. So handing over to Karis and Chris. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Keely. I might have to thank my dad if I'm being called a genetic legend, since him and Mum are the ones that pass their genes on to me. No, it's good to be here. We've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes around BredWell FedWell for quite a while now, and I'm sure a few of you are feeling the gap that we have in the industry at the moment with the program just postponed for a little bit. So it's good to show you where we're up to. Just to start, we are going to talk a little bit about the process that Keely just put into place, or told you, so let you know how we've gone about the review, where we're up to with it, before we get into and give you that taste tester. Now, it was great yesterday, Keely asked who didn't know BredWell FedWell, and I'm sure everyone in the room didn't put their hand up for the right reason, not that they wanted to be the one called out. And it's because it is it's been around for 10 years and it has been a really successful program. When it was developed back in 2011, and it began for a number of reasons. At the time, our flock numbers were around 68 million head, the lowest they'd ever been since 1887. We had a shift in the national flocks structure, where we saw changes to our profit drivers, where we were predominantly seeing, a greater ratio between meat and wool than we had seen in the past, and that was something we knew the producers, or at the time, probably weren't handling with their selection decisions as well as they could have been. We had a lot of foundational tools available that were quite new, and had limited adoption, and that was the breeding values, condition scores, and feed budgeting. And then we also had some new and exciting R&D that around productivity, and that was somewhat complex, that we knew we needed to have disseminated into industry. So that's where we were when BredWell FedWell was developed. What came about was looking at that breeding and feeding messages and getting them into a simple way, and an awareness program where it identified or helped producers identify further learning opportunities. And it has been a recipe for success. Since then, BredWell FedWell has been well and truly tried and tested. It's been around since 2011 in the sheep industry, and there have been about 4,000 participants through the monitoring and evaluation that has gone along with BredWell FedWell. it can be attributed to a net benefit to the industry of $2.48 for every ewe joined. Building on that success of the workshop, the recipe was taken and put into the beef system as well, and we saw that happen in 2016. And in the beef side of things for both northern and southern, there's been 45 workshops and another attribution there of $2.98 per cow. So the post-workshop evaluation activities showed that from attending the workshop, participants' knowledge, awareness and confidence towards genetics topics improved. Although there was a successful recipe, the industry's extension and adoption landscape has changed since BredWell FedWell's inception. So since 2011, we've had a huge amount of programs developed. The BredWell FedWell was essentially a feeder into lifetime ewe management. However, since then we've had PGS, PDS, meetups and all of that come into the system. And we needed to look back at that and see where does BredWell FedWell sit along that adoption pathway. In addition, there are also new and exciting tools available at the commercial level, such as flock profiling and heifer select. So how do we make sure we incorporate those and have everything as up to date as possible? So as part of that, it was time to kind of work out where BredWell FedWell sits and time to review, revise and refresh and realign the workshop. So as Keely said, independently, Schuster's consulting group were engaged to unpack the current workshop and consider the industry's evolving taste buds. And in particular, we needed to uncover what ingredients form the foundation of the program so they stick around, what information or cooking methods were out of date, what information, techniques and hints that have been incorporated along the time can start becoming the BredWell FedWell program in a more formal way, and how best it links into the whole course instead of an independent meal. So this was all focused on realigning BredWell FedWell with MLA's extension and adoption pathway. So the review process includes stages designed to evaluate, engage, explore, develop and pilot the renewed BredWell FedWell. So this is the path we've been taking. We looked at workshops themselves delivered by the current deliverers and reviewed the actual content as well. In addition to also looking at the last 10 years of monitoring and evaluation around BredWell FedWell and further analysing that. So as part of the engage cycle there, we interviewed a range of past hosts, deliverers and participants to uncover their views on the workshop, also what they remembered, what they got out of it, and also the things and identifying what we knew they were told that they couldn't even remember. So how do we improve on those messages in the future? So we went through all of that, and then through the exploration stages, we've been looking at, I guess, the opportunities that are there to build a better BredWell FedWell in the future. When we did all of the engagement, there came out some really key messages. One being that there was an imbalance between BredWell and FedWell components of the workshop, that it was a little bit breeding heavy. And that was seen as, I guess, through all parts, the delivery, the content, and that side of it. We also found some feedback around logistics, so making it easier to run the workshops for both deliverers and the hosts, as well as making a clear purpose of what BredWell FedWell was meant to do in our industry. And that is really being that awareness program. You'll remember the roadmap that Mick and Keely both put up yesterday, where BredWell FedWell was in the middle. It's there to be that initial learning, but to put producers to the next level of further learning through a PGS or a training package. So we've explored all of that and then went, right, we need to pull a team together here. So to design the refresh BredWell FedWell, Schuster's Consulting in collaboration brought a review team together that was skills-based. So these are our speciality chefs that we've got onto the project. And we've focused on the skills around project and program management, capability building, so making sure they were able and understood adult learning, because that's a real key point of what we're trying to achieve with BredWell FedWell, is that understanding, learning and actionable change from it. Stakeholder engagement skills, as well as practical and science-based understanding of genetics and nutrition, as well as experience in the sheep and cattle production systems. And this is our team that we've got on the project. So we've got the Schuster's consulting team, which includes Peter, Angela, Delphine and myself, as well as our technical experts. That we have Desiree Jackson, Chris Merrims, Alistair Rayner, Megan Rogers, Daryl Savage and Luke Stephen. So where are we up to? You've probably worked it out. We've done all the E's, we've evaluated, we've engaged and we've explored BredWell FedWell to date, and then from there we're now in that development stage, so pulling the content together, and that essentially is just the resources, the materials, materials that go with that, the deliverer guides, and building that all together before we go into an accreditation process and train the trainers. So once we do that, we'll be piloting this and then going from there, using that feedback from the pilots and the evaluation from that, finalising it, and then we'll be at a development phase by June. Not a development phase, a rollout phase. So what does the BredWell FedWell look like? The main key messages remain true to the intent of the original workshop. The first message is that improving productivity and profitability is good for you and industry. So we are putting a U in front of that to make it a little bit more about the producer and their business and their, I guess, what's going to be helpful to their economic return. So we talk about how that can be done through improving both nutrition and breeding, and that we focus on the whole livestock production cycle, and that is a key part of the changes that have been made, is around that production cycle and honing all of our messages in to key parts of that. The next message is that it is an investment in genetics requires investment in nutrition, and vice versa, to realise that full potential, as well as ensuring your animals are fit for purpose, and that will provide you with the greatest return on genetics and nutrition investments. So we'll touch on fit for purpose a little bit more. Chris goes into it with our taste tester for you today, but it's really the way that we're going to be driving a lot of those messages around profit drivers, making sure stock are fit for what you're trying to achieve. And then selecting traits that impact your profit drivers and setting a breeding objective will ensure your animals are fit for purpose. So they're the key messages, and I don't think they are misaligned with where BredWell FedWell was previously. The key messages there do focus on clear linkages between profitability and the importance of both selection and nutrition in achieving the breeding goals. And this was a key finding from our review process, that the links were there, we're just trying to make them a little bit stronger. So the BredWell FedWell objectives, again, we've just gone through and made sure that we've aligned these with where the program needs to be now. And as participants come in, what they will leave with an understanding of is a better understanding of developing their breeding objectives, selecting the right animals, and the importance of feeding to achieve their goals. Now, we said before that there is this is a recipe for success. BredWell FedWell has been so successful that we needed to make sure that we kept that and kept the bones of it. And the intent of the program is having that foundation based on science, and that is still there, and the research specific to our Australian beef and sheep populations. We're still keeping and it's still going to be there, is that mixture of delivery methods. So the beauty of BredWell FedWell, having the practical activities and the stock there, the discussions, the written activities and the walkthroughs of activities by the deliverers will all be part of the new BredWell FedWell, and was really identified through the engagement process with all of our interviews with deliverers, hosts and participants as key attributes to the program. One of the key findings from the research was that there was that imbalance between breeding and feeding that I mentioned before, and especially how it applied through the production cycle. So based on this, the workshop structure has been changed. So this is the biggest change that you'll see, and we're pretty proud of it. I think it does give us a really good way to talk breeding and feeding a little bit better and easier, and hopefully makes it a little bit easier for the deliverers to deliver as well. So the workshop builds upon a decision-making cycle, or what we call the breeding and feeding production cycle. So each wedge in this cycle represents a major decision point in the commercial enterprise for both genetics and nutrition. So the agenda goes through these wedges and talks about the BredWell and the FedWell components of each wedge as we go through the structure. So the agenda for the workshop, we obviously have the intros. We then talk about driving profitability in your business. Then we get into what the tools are available to you, so the breeding values and body condition scoring. And then our wedge comes in there, so we can talk about each of the production cycle components, and we go into those. To help us with developing the content from here, what we've done is identified the learning outcomes for each of the points here on the agenda. So the learning outcomes in that driving profitability in your business part of the agenda, we talk about profit drivers and understanding why animals need to be fit for purpose to drive your profit. The breeding objective, this is where we start getting into a breeding objective and introduce it and why you should have one. And the same around feeding management. We talk about the links between nutrition and genetics and profit there. And then we also uncover the challenges with breeding and feeding and what we can control and what the messages around that will be for the rest of the day. From there, we go into the breeding and feeding tools, and as you can probably guess, we understand the key learning outcomes from this is that they understand breeding values and that they understand the importance of body condition scoring, and it's as an indicator of feed supply meeting nutritional requirements. The wedges that we go into for the production cycle, for pre-joining and joining, the breeding learning outcomes there are around exploring how genetics contribute to improved conception rates, and then learning how nutrition can increase conception rates as well. So pregnancy, again, we talk about the pregnancy traits and the importance of monitoring reproductive performance. And then from a feeding perspective, we learn about the nutrition improves pregnancy outcomes, productivity of progeny, and reconception. The lambing and calving learning outcomes are around our monitoring reproductive performance and our nutrition improving those outcomes as well. So for weaning, again, we talk about our understanding the pregnancy traits, or that's got the wrong words there, but for weaning, we understand the traits that are important to your business from a fit for purpose, which encapsulates the traits that mean that your animals will be fit for market and also fit for farm. So it explores all of the traits, not just reproductive ones. And from a feeding perspective, it looks at weaner survival, so the same messages coming out of the current BredWell FedWell content. We then have a selection wedge. This one is obviously a little bit heavier on the BredWell component than the FedWell, but we help them with understanding the impact selection has on the breeding objective and achieving that and their rate of progress. And then from a feeding perspective, it's learning how nutrition and environment impacts that performance. Finally, once we've gone through that production cycle, we bring it all together, and the key learnings out of that is to have a final breeding objective on paper. So that will be a written activity that they've gone throughout the day, as well as having a nutritional calendar on paper, which is the other activity that they'll complete throughout the workshop. And finally, taking those Ferning Leather pathways and helping them identify any that they may want to want to endeavour to attend. So that's a bit of background on BredWell FedWell, the review and the new approach. It is now time for a sample of the entree. I just wanted a sample of it. Just a few notes around that. We obviously can't give you a whole day workshop in one day, so we've made a few assumptions. And due to that, so we're all at a genetics and breeding forum, so we assume you know what breeding values are. We assume that you are using them and that you know what a breeding objective is. We are going to walk you through a bit of the activities that we're doing in the workshop, so I challenge you just to take it as an opportunity to have a think about your breeding objectives, even if you've already got one, and have an opportunity to review and revise and maybe tweak. We also make the assumptions here that you've explored the importance of body condition score as an indicator of whether animals are able to meet your full genetic potential, and it's well understood that performance is made up by environment and genetics. So what are we going to show you today? We're going to run you through this section number 2 on the agenda, driving profitability in your business. And then we're going to skip all the way to the pregnancy wedge and give you a bit of a taster of that before coming back around bringing it all together. So with that, I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to say that I'm really honoured to be here. BredWell FedWell has been such a fantastic program. It's been fantastic for the farmers, fantastic for deliverers like me, and it's been a really great feeder program for lifetime ewe management and others, and we're going to build on that, Keely, aren't we? It's been such a successful program, and to be invited to join in with the review program process has been really terrific. I'm really keen to know how to pitch this conversation. I'll have to apologise. When Chris Howey walked in the room, he said, "I didn't know you were speaking, Chris, otherwise I'd have gone to the other room." He's probably still going to be thinking that by the end of the day, but I'll do my best, Chris. Can you let me know, are you here because you're a farmer and you're interested in BredWell FedWell? Yes? No? Yeah? One? Thanks. And are you here because you want to deliver BredWell FedWell in the future? Yeah, got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those, Ripper? No trouble at all. We're certainly going to be developing a train-the-trainer. So why are the rest of you here? Just out of interest? Because you want to know how we design programs or want to know more about the program?
Because of the opportunity it creates.
Because of the opportunity it creates? Yeah. Any more?
I've hosted before and just want to see what's coming this time.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've really enjoyed working with guys like you, Lockie, particularly seed stock producers. It's a great opportunity to host through the seed stock producer to help educate the clients in your business, a service to them, service to us, and it's a great thing. I can't think how many seed stock producers who have done their great gateway into it. All right, so we've got seed stock producers, 1 or 2 farmers, a few people keen to deliver it, and a few people that like to understand how we develop these programs. There's a lot of rigour in this, and one of the challenges that we've had, and Karis has mentioned it, it's been fantastic working with you too, I should say, that BredWell FedWell has been really successful, and we were really cognizant of wanting to bring all the good things along with the next version and update it. And there were some things that were outdated, so we had to think about which bits to leave out as well. So that's been a really rigorous process and quite an independent process with some really good thinkers behind the review panel to go, oh yes, we agree with that, no, we don't agree with that, what about a bit more of that? And they certainly haven't held back in their opinion. So let me make a start. Normally I would be out and about, or we'd be in a room with 20 producers. We do a mix of practical stuff, a mix of... Oh, who's been to BredWell FedWell out of interest? Lockie's obviously been to one. Yeah, half the audience. Okay, so I'm preaching sort of to the converted. So the difference you will notice, the big difference that Karis alluded to, and I think it's worth repeating, is that remember in the mornings it used to be BredWell and then lunch and then FedWell and a few other things between, a bit of outside with the yards and inside. What the review panel said right at the very start was it'd be much better if we can put the BredWell and FedWell together at each point in the reproduction cycle, just to cement that concept that we're breeding well and we're feeding well, and there's no point in doing one without the other. And I've got a few points. Holy moly, this session was almost not worth having, was it? With all the stuff that's gone on the last 2 days, they've just gone, oh, we've got that in the BredWell. Yeah, we've got that. What did Isabel said? She married an agronomist. She didn't say that was the best thing about managing an agronomist, but she nearly did. The high quality pastures that she's got now on the farm because she married an agronomist to enable their sheep to express their genetic potential, which is fantastic. I get that, and we get that too. So it's about the genes and about the pastures. What we decided to do is we had some really challenging conversations about whether we actually teach people how to do things or we teach them the importance of doing it and then create a pathway for them to learn somewhere else. And that's a really critical thing, wasn't it, Karis, to do that? So growing grass was one of those things. We can't go around the whole of Australia and be experts on growing grass in their patch everywhere, but we can teach them about the importance of getting the nutrition right. So that's how we delineated that. Does that make sense, Penny? It's been quite an interesting difference. And so when we talk about the profit drivers, and I'll sort of go into delivery mode now, we talk about the profit drivers. We ask people to consider what the profit drivers are in their enterprise. And what we decided that wherever we are around Australia, the profit drivers for different businesses will be different. When I think about where I live in Holbrook, the profit driver, the first one is stocking rate, the second one is stocking rate, and the third one is stocking rate. The fourth one is matching feed demand to feed supply, which is probably more about lambing date and calving date than anything else. But when you go to the Hay Plains and deliver this, it's not stocking rate. Their stocking rate is given, and that their profitability drivers are more about the individual animal performance. So it's very different that we make the distinction, that we don't fall into the trap of thinking the profit driver at our place is the same as the profit driver at Tony's place, which is the same as profit driver at Penny's. It isn't, but there are some principles that are the same, so we talk about the principles. But we did think that there are two profit drivers that do go through everywhere, wherever you are. And, oh, by the way, interrupt me anytime you like with a question or a challenge, or very happy to do that. Otherwise it'll be really boring and Chris really will wish he was in the other room. All right, reproductive performance. We spoke about that. Everybody's spoken about that over the last 2 days. Reproductive performance is such a driver of profit for so many reasons. Let's have a conversation about it. Lockie, why is reproductive performance important on your place? Anybody as well? What's the gig?
The less amount of mature animals need to get a heap of calves and lambs about.
Yeah, absolutely. So that balance between the energy that's consumed in the maternal phase compared to the energy consumed in things that are actually growing and adding value is a really interesting thing, isn't it? And in Coopworths or maternal ewes, it's even more pronounced, isn't it? You've got to have that fecundity because you're misplacing a $50, $60 fleece and you've got to replace it with more lambs on the ground. Any more? What else? Now I've got a trick question for you. It's not a trick question. This is really, I thought, fascinating. Hamish said it yesterday. We'll talk about, Hamish said that we're selecting for traits, and sorry, we're going a little bit past, but it doesn't matter. We're selecting for traits to reduce the cost of production by increasing productivity, increasing the value of a product, and we had so much of that from Will yesterday, to focus on sustainability, and Nick mentioned breech, wrinkle, and moving to reducing his reliance upon mulesing, welfare, animal health. And then Hamish said reducing generation interval was a really important thing in your selection. And what's that got to do with reproductive performance, and what's that got to do with genetic development? There's heaps of geneticists in the room. Give me the answer. What do you think? Why does reducing generation interval affect both of those, and how do we fit it into a systems thinking? Penny?
Well, reducing the interval increases your rate of genetic gain.
Yep.
Progress.
Yep.
And you then have a ewe or a heifer that's being productive earlier as well within your farm, returning on your investment sooner rather than later.
Yep. And so your new genes are better than your old genes. Okay, so let me think a little bit more about this. So do you remember the slide that he put up, which is selection differential, the difference between your current genes and the new genes you're bringing in, times heritability, how much of it's passed on, divided by, here I am talking about genetics next to a bloody geneticist. Oh gosh, better get this right, tell me if I get it wrong. Divided by generation interval. So the potential gain that you make is divided by the generation interval over your whole herd or flock. If you've got a big number down the bottom, then you're dividing that gain by a lot, and you don't get much gain. If you've got a small number, then you're getting a lot of gain. So the generation interval is the average age of the dam. So we had a really interesting conversation with the Northern beef guys. This is a number of years ago. Richard Apps gave me a fantastic paper which said that the Northern beef guys didn't think EBVs worked because they saw no genetic progress from using EBVs. The seed stock producers said they didn't bother with them because the commercial people didn't ask for them, and therefore they took the view that EBVs didn't work and there was a low uptake. And the penny dropped for me. I went up to a place, a station where my son was jackarooing, where they had 88,000 cows and a reproductive success rate in the heifers of about 50%. And they didn't have a cast-for age cow sale. The cows died on the farm. And because if you put it on an Excel spreadsheet, 50% of reproduction rate times 70% times 50% times 50%, you don't have any cast-for-age cows, they die on the farm. So if Caris was to get that sum of they're buying some bulls that are better than their cows in theory, but you multiply that by the heritability, then divide it by a great big huge number that might be 10, they're not making any gain. So the answer is to feed their heifers nice tight joining or tight program with their joining to get the heifers into the nutrition, to get higher rates of heifers pregnant, put it into their system, and then reduce the generation interval so they can make genetic gain. So that's a great example, I think, of how reproductive performance affects not only the rapidity of the genetic gain, but also is highly influenced by feeding and the management system that you can create to create this two drivers of profit. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? It's a really long way of explaining it, but it just makes absolute sense. Yeah, fire away.
I think there's just one more point missing there, and sort of is the balance between the genetics and the environment is also the cost. I mean, it's great to get that progress happening pretty quickly, but there is an investment on it. Like, a heifer produces a cow that's smaller, and depending on the market and the investment, it might be 3 years or it might be 7 years to recover that.
Yeah.
So it's really important to look at what the market is doing on top of the genetics and the feeding.
Yeah, great point. And one of the things I really love about BredWell FedWell is the deliverers like me have got the license, the instructions to say that this is about you, about your breeding objective on your farm for your profit, for your market. And so all of the message we come here, we hope are principles, and people have got to think about how they work for them on their farm. And a lot of the conversations we have in BredWell FedWell is about what's your breeding objective on your farm and how does that affect your profit with your business for your expectations and your ambitions. All right, I better poke along. Meeting market specifications is another profit driver that we thought was really important, and clearly is important. And boy, didn't Will give us a fantastic discussion about that yesterday. And I'm going to talk about breeding objective in a minute, but before I do that, when we think about that, potentially in the past in the lamb supply chain, the price has been determined by just kilograms, that's it, whether it's carcass weight or whether it's live weight. But in the future, and I was sitting next to Tony and he was just about having a heart attack thinking how good this is going to be in the future. Isn't it, Tony? It's going to be brilliant, where it's carcass weight times lean meat yield times EQ and a value-based marketing system. That's a whole different thing. So understanding meeting market specifications and getting paid for what you actually produce and the value that is for the whole of the supply chain is such a fascinating thing that we've got to get our mind around, because I think Will's the first cab off the rank. And Will's not in the room, but oh boy, to think about all of the work that MLA and sheep producers and all the people that have gone over the years to get to where Will is now is just such an extraordinary experience. The number of board meetings we sat through thinking, how are we going to get objective measurement? How are we going to get hoof tracking? How are we going to get DEXA? And now it's happening. It's brilliant. All right, so that was a sidetrack. So the two profit drivers that we thought within the BredWell FedWell, we'll have a great big discussion about what are the profit drivers that you think on your farm, and then we'll for your business, and we're going to focus on those particular two because they're really important, and we can within BredWell FedWell. There are lots of other profit drivers that can be worked through with other programs that MLA and probably AWI bring to the market as well. So driving profitability, one of the really key things about profitability in livestock are that livestock are fit for purpose. That's been one of the core messages from BredWell FedWell since its inception: fit for purpose on farm, fit for purpose for market, and I would say also with an underlying economically sound business model. I'm sure that fits in there, Karis, but I'm not quite sure where. So at this point, we would normally have the conversation about what's fit for farm and what's fit. Well, let's have that conversation. Livestock to suit the operating environment and the business structure. So if I think about where I lived at Holbrook for 20 years, 750 mils rainfall, improved pastures. I had a particular sort of livestock that suited my environment particularly well, and there's lots of types of livestock that didn't suit that environment well at all. Maybe I can ask some questions. I'm picking on a few. Jim, how about I pick on Jim Mecketh for a minute? I'll pick on him. In your environment, tell us about some of the constraints or the attributes of your environment that you're farming in. Pretend you're delivering a wagga.
Yep, sure. So wagga, sometimes we get a wet summer, sometimes we get most of the time we get a very dry summer. So in a merino enterprise would be keeping the dust out of the wool, for instance. You know, we don't want too much open backs and dust sucking type of wools. What else? Okay, so yeah, it's reproduction is going to be key. We're probably going to be an enterprise that's turning off a lot of surplus sheep. So reproduction, timing it to fit in with the seasonal pasture growth curve.
Yep.
So yeah,
That'll do. That's terrific. So we're talking about sort of 550, 600 mils of rain, some improved, some native pasture, lots of lucerne in spots, breeding, and that sort of environment. So we're delivering this from Albany to Scone and up into Queensland. So you can imagine that this part of the day is about having a conversation with the crowd to talk about what their environment is and what sort of animals suit their environment. Are they a Brahman? Are they a Hereford? Are they an Angus? Are they a Saxon Merino, Pepin Merino, First Cross Ewe, Coopworth, Composite? You know, tell us about your rainfall, about the constraints. Are you struggling with worms the whole time? How are your feet going? All those things. So that's a really important part of this process. One for the deliverer, so he knows how to pitch it, and the other to get the juices flowing within the room. What does fit for farm actually mean? And so we can match the right kind of animals to the environment that we're working in. And so we can optimise the production of kilograms, or what it is, it's another profit driver. They optimise the production of kilograms of the saleable product per hectare. It probably is a big driver for us, or it might be per unit if you're out in the Hay Plains. Is there anything else? Did I miss anything in there? No. So far so good.
Keep going.
Got the boss standing next to me. Keep rolling. No worries. What's the next bit? So fit for market. Boy, we've heard a lot about that. So one of the things we ask our producers in the forum like this is to say, what do you produce and how do you produce it and why do you produce it? It's a pretty simple conversation. Let's do a practice. Fire away. What do you do at Killendale and why do you do it?
Killendale is basically a grass factory. So we've got deep loam flats at Holbrook. And so we have a small crossbred breeding herd, but our primary business is trading steers. So we buy those steers in at 280 to 320 kilos, and we'll return them off in 6 to 8 months at 500 to 600 kilograms. And they'll all meet specs for fat, entry weight, and generally they supply directly into a grass meat program.
What are the specs?
4 to 18 mil fat.
Yep.
And about 480 to 580 kilograms, just under 600 kilograms. And they'll be processed to full milk.
Yep.
They're a lot of fun doing it.
So you've got a particular breed that you purchase in, or a particular type, I suppose, rather than a breed. So what is it?
Yeah, so our breeding herd is crossbred, so Angus Shorthorn cross primarily.
Yep.
We've made a recent decision to upscale with focusing on IMF, so we've actually gone to a composite and bought some new composite balls this year that we'll use on a mature cow herd. We utilise AI on our heifers. So last year I was able to secure, and we had some limited success with paratreatment, because I aim to use the best genetics available, and certainly that was proven. Not without some challenges last year, but we've got some good numbers of pregnancies by some. And in terms of the trade cattle, primarily Angus.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they fit the bill.
Some crossbreds. Yeah.
I'm going to move. Tony, you've finished lambs in your feedlot. Tell us about the specs.
I supply foals, and their specs have changed somewhat this year. They've gone heavier, so 2 to 3 score, and that would be 20 to 28 kilos, and severe penalties like that outside.
Yeah, right. How do you manage that to get within inside that grid?
Weighing and monitoring and measuring everything we can.
Yeah. And do you purchase particular animals? How do you know which animals will perform?
All your own breed.
All your own breed. So you finish your own. Yeah.
Select genetics we need to do that.
Brilliant. And what breed are they?
The composite use.
Yep.
And we use some terminals, models.
Fantastic. All right. Penny, did you want to?
A lot of feedback back to be able to get our carcass weight and fat score. That's the other feedback which I want more.
Yeah. Well, that's a great conversation. If I was in a BredWell FedWell room now with more time, we'd certainly have that conversation. Yeah. Penny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment, and maybe we'll cover this later, Chris, as a producer and an ex-deliverer of this. The challenge that came at this point was, we're talking about what industry needs and wants with lamb inspection. We don't want them too fat and we want them to be this, that and the other. But as the lamb job has got better and better, people can produce whatever, as long as it fits somewhere between 18 and 30 kilos, and you'll get really rewarded. So I'm not sure whether BredWell FedWell is going to sort of help steer people down a more industry, future-focused pathway.
Well, I don't know, Penny, you sort of picked a nerve with me, obviously. That is such an important conversation. And if I was in a BredWell FedWell forum, we'd now have that conversation. But I can give you just a tiny bit. I think that the challenge is, and this is nothing about BredWell FedWell, I don't think, but maybe BredWell FedWell can help in improving reproduction performance, because I believe that in a supply-constrained environment where demand is completely outstripping supply, processors are forced to pay big money for all sorts of rubbish that's out of spec, and therefore the market signals, particularly through the sale yards, are completely incorrect for what our food service industry and international clients would say. And you remember in the Albury Lamex, the guy from Cisco, one of the biggest purchasers in lambs in the world, says, yeah, I'll buy them from New Zealand because you hit the specs, and when they run out I come to you guys. And boy, it's really hard to get the specs, and I think that's just because we haven't got enough bloody sheep. And just out of interest, we did some modelling in Sheep Producers Australia to determine how many sheep we could run in Australia before we to maintain the current global market supply of red meat that we produce, which is something like 36% of total exports is us, I think, about that figure. We could have 80 million sheep by 2030 and still not have enough. So the answer to your question is more sheep, more competition, and people like Will driving premiums for the right spec, and for those outside spec, not getting the premium. And I know JBS tightened up their grid to try and achieve those, and they couldn't get the market, couldn't get the lambs, and so they had to open it up again. So I think it's a supply issue, and I think it will be resolved with more sheep. And I've been saying that for 10 years, but I think we're now starting to get there, and the drought didn't help. Great question.
Yeah. Just to build on that too, Penny, so a lot of, when we did the engagement part of this process as well, a lot of feedback came back around too much time was spent on the state of the industry today, and the story that was told and built throughout the day a lot was you've got a job here to help with that, with flock numbers and growing those. The way we've handled that is to come back and say, right, we're going to reflect on your business and your enterprise. So here especially, we're talking about what's getting them to think about their markets and making sure they're producing the right sheep for that, as well as their future markets. So before we even getting into setting breeding goals, they've got a clear path of what they see as their situation.
Yeah.
So talking about future markets, is there a touch on the generation interval and the likelihood of change in that market? Because it's very easy for a lot of producers to get behind the eight ball there and not prepare for it.
Yeah, the short answer is no. In regards to BredWell FedWell and the scope that it has, we've really focused on I guess this is only one part of it, but getting that you've got profit drivers, you need to identify them. They're yours, and then how do we link that to a breeding objective and the decisions you make and what tools are available there? And then how do we make sure we also are getting that, I guess, the best genetic potential out of those animals by feeding them correctly and making sure that their supply and demand gap is low. So it's really that awareness program moving forward through that. So I think we do need to probably roll on a little bit around getting past fit for purpose, because there is a lot more to the BredWell FedWell and that, I guess, the remit that we have for it.
All right, thanks for getting me back on track, Karis. All right, so we finished that bit. So what we would do is then get the team to jot down some points. What's fit for your farm? What's fit for your market? What does fit for purpose mean for you? And then we go on to create a breeding objective. And the way we've done it is we're going to ask really up front for a breeding objective. For the producers in the audience, we've got a learned audience here, we would ask everybody in the BredWell FedWell, who's got a breeding objective? You know, everybody puts their hand up, and then you go, so who's written it down? Most of the hands go down, it's probably about 15%, isn't it, that leave their hands up. And then we go, fantastic, well, I want you, can you write it down and let's have a chat about it? And so in this particular idea, we would now ask breeders to write down a breeding objective, and we would guide them through that. And it's going to be a high-level breeding objective because we're asking them to do it before we've taught them how to do it, if that makes sense. So some already know, and they'll be all over it, but others won't. And sometimes I've had the funniest conversations when I've got 2 or 3 members of the same family and go, you got a breeding objective? Yeah, well, put their hand up and go, got it written down? No. Can you write it down? And then they have the discussion. Well, we're going to do... No, we don't. You sure? No, I thought that was ages ago. We're doing this. Oh, for God's sake. And that's the point of it. A breeding objective has got to be written down. It's got to be clear in your mind. It clarifies it for you, but it also means it clarifies it for your stakeholders and clarifies it for the seed stock producer that you're going with. And if your breeding objective aligns with your seed stock breeding objective, you're driving down the right driveway. If it doesn't, you're not. And Nick went on about that quite a lot, didn't he? It was terrific. All right, so what we do is we would say, what's your breeding level? And I used to start with, what's ideal? For you, I want to. And you go, I want to have a cow that has a heifer calf that joins at 14 months old, has an unassisted heifer by 2, produce feedlot steers that Keith will be really happy with in Ranges Valley at 460 kilos. So you start to do a bit of a narrative. And so you get something like this. I'm not going to ask you to do it because, is that all right? Because create a genuine multi-purpose self-replacing merino flock. So we get a really high-level narrative, and we go, fantastic, that's a great start. But what we want to do is move that forwards to what we're calling a smart breeding objective. And so the term smart, where did that come from?
Yeah, not sure.
Not sure. Anyway, we've adopted it. It's really good because it's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So the generic breeding objective that I want to do this really high-level stuff, not being time-based and not being specific, means that often people can select for a great heap of traits and not get anywhere. But narrowing it down to something smart, I think, is one of the key parts of BredWell FedWell. One of the key parts has always been walking up with a written breeding objective, turning that into genetic language, and then working out which EBVs are the most important for you, and having a short list and having some ideas to how to work to get them. So this is a slightly different approach to the same concept. So I'll give you a quick example of the sort of conversation we would have. And just keep kicking me if I'm talking for too long. So when I first got to the farm that I managed in Holbrook, it was a wool growing business. Got there in about 1993. Wool was 80% of our profit. We had ewes, we had lambs, hoggets, and lots of wethers. Wethers were the profit drivers. The low cost of production wool, 21 micron wool, 83% lambing, 300 bales of wool, something like that. And it was to stuff the bales with low quality. It was a commodity. we went through a point where we weren't making enough money as a commodity. We had to decommoditise, and we've heard about that in the last 2 days, haven't we? The whole concept of a commodity, reduced cost of production, race to the bottom on a global scale. We're going to lose that race at some point. We've done well so far, but we need to recognise that we're creating a premium product for a premium price and market it. And we went through the same process, and getting some fantastic advice from the people that were best qualified to give it, we determined that we needed to move away from our wethers. 19 micron meat was worth more than wool, and so our breeding objective changed to 19 micron, 5.5 kilos instead of 6. We didn't want wethers cutting 8 kilos. We needed to get on the boat, whatever it was. So we had how long does it going to take us to get there, and what's the difference? And the difference became this, what we're terming a smart. So the difference between our original breeding objective and our new breeding objective was we need to drop our micron by 2 microns in 5 years. We need to maintain our fleece weight. We need to improve wool quality because we want spinners, because we think Italian suits are probably more profitable than Russian blankets, which is what we were supplying before. We want the wethers have got to be sold now at 12 months instead of 5 years old. So we've got to have the growth rates to get the wethers on the boat. And we've got to do that within 5 years. So we had 4 or 5 specific targets to meet that we could identify what traits they were and select for them. How's that?
No, did it work? Did you get there?
Oh, we sure did.
Tell me the end of the story.
The last couple of years, we got to... So we micron tested all our sheep. We changed our ram supply because we had to go to a ram supply that had the same breeding objective and was producing what we wanted to produce. We also had terrible trouble with worms, so we needed to work on FEC. So I actually got a geneticist that had 20,000 fine wool sheep down around Harrow that was breeding her own rams to breed some for me as well, under contract, 15 or 20 a year, tight EBVs, and we dropped the whole thing within 5 years, and it worked.
And then you have to revise your breeding objective again because you've made it.
Yeah, revised it again, and the next part was, well, we need to give up mulesing, which wasn't even in the original one. So we go all of a sudden, there's a whole different new traits and a different program, and how do we now reduce? Because the Italian suit people now say, if you're mulesing your sheep, we might not want your wool in 5 years' time. So that's exactly right. So it continues. It's an evolutionary thing. The high level one may stay, but this is the point I think that we're building on, getting it smart, getting it specific, getting some particular traits that you need. Any comments about that discussion? It's quite a good discussion. It's a really long part of BredWell FedWell, isn't it, Benny? And it hasn't been an easy one to deliver, so I hope we can improve on it. So we identify with the various individuals. They have plenty of time to work that through for their own perspective about their breeding objective on their farm for their expectations. We identify what they are, and then we start translating that into the genetic language and the traits that they need to select for to achieve it. So that same logic of I want to get the narrative, turn that into some specific things, then turn that into genetic language, identify what traits they are, and then determine how to select for those traits. Does that make sense? Exactly the same as it's always been, just a slightly different approach. So then we review, so we get them to do a new one. What's the smart one? Is it smart? Can you revise to be smarter? Is it as smart as it can be? All right, so we talked about genetics. Now the next part is that, as we said before, we're doing genetics and we're doing feed-based, and we're doing one after the other as we move around the wedge. So performance equals genetics plus environment. We're now going to start talking about nutritional management. And of course, we'll be talking about why we need to invest in nutrition, not how to. So that's quite a distinction from the past, because there are lots of other programs that are regionally based that will tell us how to. Okay, what else? Understanding feed demand, so we'll go through all of that. I don't need to explain that to you guys, you know all this stuff pretty much. Understand different stages of lactation, whether the dry cow, we ask questions like, what's a dry cow? How many megajoules a dry cow? 70 or 80. What protein? 6% protein. What sort of time of the year does that suit you? What sort of pasture base? What sort of protein level do your feeder steers need? What sort of quality pasture? What protein? How much of it to achieve 1.2 kilos a day? So we tease all that out, and that's a great conversation, depending on where we are. I'm just going to scoot through. I used to love getting... Sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, no. I was going to interrupt, but it's all good. Oh, I have now. So the breeding objective activity, for those of you who've who've delivered or been to one before, it was an activity that you ran through all at once. So now it goes throughout the whole workshop. So we've started it, it's not finished. We then go through as we showcase traits at the important times in the production cycle. We then get them to think about that at the time. So then at the end, when we bring it all together, they have a final breeding objective that's linked to the breeding value language as well. We also do the same thing in the feed side of it. So we've got a written feed activity now, which goes through helping them map out their feed supply, which is what we're doing here around quality and quantity. And then as we go through each production wedge, we talk about the demand that the animals have at that time, and they mark it on there as well. So we can get to a point where they can see their feed gap, and they go away with that, as well as the condition score targets at the key production times. So that's how this builds. We're not going into it too much detail today, but I'm a little bit proud of it. So we need a spruik it.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I delivered a BredWell FedWell at Omeo a little while ago, and it was in the days where we had the MLA feed to pasture growth outlook tool, which will be replaced by something even much more sophisticated and better, which we hope to tie in with this. But I got to Omeo and discovered that here's the pasture growth curve. They've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting autumn break, 120 frosts for the year, 95% of getting 50% rainfall in the spring. Put it all up there and go, so when are you calving, guys? And they were going calving in the autumn. Okay, let's have a conversation about that then, and why are you doing that? And the answer was, well, the cows go up into the mountains and then they've got to have their calves, and then they've got to be a certain size so that the calves can follow the cows down out of the mountains. So I go, yeah, no, that makes sense. When was the last time you put your cows up in the mountains? They said, about 1987. And so that was a really fantastic BredWell FedWell that we ran, and their breeding objective was based on a traditional model where the whole world had changed around them, and the opportunity. I think who said it this morning? I think it was Nick, wasn't it? If you come last in a weather trial, you've actually won because you've got so much opportunity to change. To go to an environment like that and then and encourage the thinking to change to meet to improve is just so exciting as a deliverer. And I know those of you that delivered have probably had similar sort of things. So providing them with the data and the logic. Let's keep going. So we're going to scoot around. So remember, there's our plan. The first few sessions, setting the scene, pre-joining, breeding, feeding tools. We're going to just whip down into the pregnancy bit. So you'll recognise this slide from John Young. It's a fantastic slide. As a deliverer, I would explain the importance of reproduction, twin survival. So on the left-hand side, you've got farm profit. That was done in 2014. So just imagine the figures now. And on the bottom, so you would explore that. That's the litter size, and then each line is the survival. And we talk about why survival is important, how it's important, and how it drives profit, and what's the point of having the benefit of having a ewe that has 2 live lambs that are growing at a tremendous rate, and all those conversations that Lockie and I just had before about the percentage of megajoules required in the maintenance phase compared to those that are adding value and kilograms of lamb produced per kilograms of ewe maintained, and all those wonderful conversations that we have. And the importance of looking through genetics and nutrition through the pregnancy side. So we've got a suite. This is put up there. Karis will want to interrupt me in a minute, I hope. So this is the format that we've got for talking about the different traits. So we're talking about, so we'll support it with John Young's work, of course, then what's the trait? What are the suite of traits that support reproductive efficiency and success? Litter size is 1, what is it? What's the unit? What's the heritability? What's the ASBV? There's an adult one, there's a yearling weight. What's the ASBV look like? What's the accuracies looking like for particular? And then what are what's an average, and then what are the things that we get that are associated benefits with that, and what are the traits that might be antagonistic that we need to look out for? What do you need? Can we?
Yeah, keep going.
Keep going.
So all traits will be presented in the same way. And so it essentially is, here's a tool for you, and then we go into, does this match your breeding objective, or should it be part of your breeding objective, or are there any considerations? So, and that's why we put the free lunches and the watch outs up there, so they can think about the correlations there. So then we can sell them with an index message later in the day once they've kind of ticked that they want everything, because we all do.
So this will be an interesting conversation when we say a suite of EBVs, does it fit, does it not fit? And everybody goes, yeah, it fits and I want that. So then we have to have the conversation about how many traits later. So there are 3 decisions, and of course that process continues throughout the day. It's a similar process as we go around that wedge, which we think is quite powerful, because repeatability in getting people to think in that way throughout the day is really important. What else? So then we go into the nutritional components, what's happening in utero during that pregnancy stage. We talk about placental development, fetal development, the effect of birth weight on survival, the effect of birth weight on colostrum and milk production, and we talk about condition scoring and all those things that are very familiar with you, and the effect of nutrition on that. Skipping over this pretty quickly. So we've got some sample slides there we'll talk about lamb mortality. There's some great slides about birth weight. Just out of interest, we did a Lambs Alive at Holbrook a few years ago now. It was a really interesting exercise, and we talk about this sort of conversations that we have. We asked people to come along to the Lambs Alive workshop, and it was at lambing time. We said, just whip round your lambing ewes and bring in any dead lambs, and we'll stick them on the table and weigh them and do some autopsies and things. And we put them into 3 kilos, 4 kilo, 5 kilo, 6 kilo and above lots on the table, with, weigh them and put them here and put them here. And we found that there were a heap of 3s and heaps of 6s, and all the 4s and 5s are out in the paddock still. So it tells a great story, and we talk about that throughout the day, and we've got some great graphs and charts. And also that compromise that whilst we want great nutrition to produce birth weight and milk production, you can overcook singles, and then we start talking about separation of singles and twins. All right, so we do condition score. We introduce condition score. This was a great feeder for Lifetime U, of course. Many people have done Lifetime U, but it's really important. We're probably not going to do the condition scoring physical thing, are we? Just because it took too much time, and most people have done it now. But we teach people how to do it. We'll tell people how important it is to get it right, what it is, and then we'll hand them on to a program where they can actually spend some time doing it. All right.
Yeah, so just to build on this slide too, the same way that we've got a breeding value showcase, we do the same thing with body condition score targets. So there will always be, at this point of the wedge or the production cycle, these are your targets, so that it's a clear message and it's always presented in the same way, so they've got that repetitiveness again.
And now we've got all the maternal data to put into it too. It's even more robust. So we've got the merino data and the maternal data as well. What else? So we'll go through the usual thing, pregnancy testing. The value of pregnancy testing and scanning has been a big thing with BredWell FedWell. It's been one of the things that people have wanted to go away with, but not only just scanning, but obviously identifying litter size. And we're doing a lot of work within the industry on triplets and managing triplets. As you know, quite a lot of people are getting 10-15% triplets with adequate nutrition now, so we've got to work on how to measure that. So we talk about litter size, scanning, and of course separating them at their earliest convenience, and why they're different. Their megajoule requirements are different. How to aim for the right condition score of those different groups, different cohorts to enable the right lamb birth weight, and so on. So nothing's changed there. Similar sort of conversation. And so then we beg the question and have the discussion. So given what you've just heard, what are the things that you might think that you can improve upon in your flock with your ewes to achieve a better outcome? Anything else? No? All right. Oh, I think I'm done.
Yeah, you sped through. So from there, we also, throughout the wedge, we talk about the further learning opportunities, and we flag them in a way that's what can you read, what can you learn, what can you watch, and what can you visit. So that will be a part there too.
Sorry.
No, clicker. So just skipping through down to bringing it all together. I'm not sure how we're going for time. Sorry, Keely. All good. Yeah. So the bringing it all together, we get to a point where we finalise that breeding objective and have a bit of an action plan of how they're going to use it, as well as a feeding plan. or not a feeding plan, but a calendar lined up. We reiterate the key messages here as well. So the key messages are around that improving the production cycle and the traits that are there as a tool to use. That setting that breeding objective is a good way to focus on your profit drivers and achieve it. And using objective data and visual assessment is the way to go. We then also reiterate those feeding messages, which will be meeting the nutritional requirements of your animals has a positive impact on your profit, and making sure that we've got that strong link between nutrition and reproductive performance, but also making sure that they know that that's the best way to see the genetic potential of their animals. So that's the entree to BredWell FedWell we're giving today. If you've got any other questions after, please come up and have a chat to us. We are going to be doing a call for expressions of interest for deliverers, hosts and participants. So please keep an eye out for that, or if you know you're already today, please come up and see us so we can get your details. So where are we up to with the review process at the moment? We did discuss it earlier, but we're at that develop stage. So we're really doing the hard work now. You've seen sheep, we're currently doing beef, and we'll be piloting the beef BredWell FedWell in May, or doing a test, and then from there building it into a pilot program in June and July. So yeah, please keep your eyes out for any opportunities to host, deliver or participate. We are looking for hosts and participants for the pilot series. So if you are interested, please come and talk to us. And then once the program is finalised, there'll be an ongoing expression of interest process for hosts and participants, and that will all go through the MLA channels. Thanks.
Great timing as well. So we've got 15 minutes now if we have any questions. I know we've had some questions throughout, but dedicated time. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, Karis and Chris, that was great. Just, I guess I've got a few questions. Just on the last point in terms of, I think previously deliverers were expected to get the groups together with the hosts and things like that, and I think that was one of the perhaps barriers identified. Going forward, how is that process going to be different, and can you use the livestock agency network to get the groups together, and then the facilitator, because we're all short of time, can then they just rock up and deliver? So I guess that's my first question. And then a second question around profit drivers, given that so many producers don't actually even know their cost of production, or even what their profit drivers are. What information are you using to actually help, like are you using benchmarking sort of stuff, or pointing them in the direction to actually go and calculate that finance, so they actually, same message, measure to monitor, but with their finance as well. So sorry, 2 questions.
Yeah, so answering the first question, it definitely came up from our delivery interviews that the logistics and the getting to a point of having a workshop was quite difficult and a barrier. We haven't got a firm answer of how it's all going to look, but opportunities that were identified by the review panel included using our grower groups and people like Land Services and that more. So I think it will be looked at. It also has gone to an electronic process as well, so you can put an expression of interest in that I want to participate. So then when we do have enough people in that region, we know that we need a plan one and things like that. So it's been identified as something we're going to be working on. That will all still be managed by Schuster's Consulting, but that rollout process hasn't been completely confirmed yet.
Don't forget the livestock agents.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that have actually already gone through, let's say lifetime, the people that we need to target are the people we need to target are the ones that perhaps have never done a lifetime U group, and they only go to their livestock agent for advice, so that utilising those networks, I think, will get to that next level of adoption. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
I might comment on the profit
one. Yeah.
I'll comment on the profit one just from my own perspective, and Karis might have something from the reviewer's perspective, but when I was delivering it, and the original profit map was put up, and it came out of the front page of the Victorian Livestock Farm Monitor program, you know, with gross income, there's to get to EBIT. And as soon as I put that slide up, those people that knew their cost of production and gone through that process, they're all over it. Those that hadn't, their eyes just glazed over. And it was not the right time to teach them what that was, because that can take some time, which is why the approach has been to identify 2 profit drivers in general terms that are important. We know they're important whether they know it or not, and then point them to Edge and Business Edge as products of MLA to help them work through that process themselves. I hope that's answered that question. But it was really tricky to work out. BredWell FedWell, the challenge was wanting to deliver everything, and do you do it over 2 days, or do you make it a 1 day and make pathways? So we've gone for 1 day and making clear pathways to the other programs. It's a great question. Got it?
Yeah, no more to build there. I think we spent a lot of time there, but a lot of it is around giving guidance to the deliverers around those conversations. And we've built that into the train the trainer packages that we've got drafted. And I think a lot of it is just about touching on it, making them aware, sending them to those pathways like Chris said, and then moving on so they can see the connection to the main parts of the BredWell FedWell that we're focusing on in the day, which is more the fit for purpose, breeding objective, and having a feeding calendar and plan.
Thank you, Karis and Chris. I've been a little bit sceptical of the review process, so I've now moved to slightly excited.
Slightly excited. That's probably good for you.
We'll take a win.
One of the bits of feedback that I gave through the review process was having some really good tools to use at the end. So we walk away with that paper-based breeding objective with the traits that we now need to use when we're selecting the right animals. But the online tools and apps that we have are still not very intuitive and quite clunky and difficult to teach. And even RAM Select, which has been talked about a fair bit here, you need to teach somebody how to use it. And if you need to explain why a joke is funny, it's not funny. So if you need to teach someone how to use a really easy to use tool, it's not easy to use. So I think there needs to be a bit more focus on how do we now easily take this breeding objective and make it easy for us to search and sort catalogues in a intuitive way. And I know there's been a lot of work on the Sheep Genetics website, but still from a buyer's perspective, it's still not very easy to use.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason there's a whole wedge on selection in the agenda. So that selection wedge doesn't just, it goes through the practical activity that we've got in it now around how do you select an animal using all of the information. They go out at the start with the visual. We give them information around breeding values. We hear all of the wedges, and then in the selection wedge we come back and they go back out and do the activity with the breeding values in hand. As part of that, we also go through how do you prepare for a sale. So there is that component of, okay, what do we do with our breeding objective? Built into it a little bit more, I think, than previously. In regards to the tools, we make them aware of them, but because of the nuances around them that you've identified, we don't go through that as content delivered.
If I could just make a comment there as well, I think this process has really shown, especially going through the resources, seeing what we do need to develop that's maybe possibly not there yet, so that we can create something and then we can pass it on to the producers at the end of the whole process.
I might make a quick comment. Just while Keely's moving around to the next question, that I found, Penny, when I delivered Southern beef, that I get to the end of it and everybody get that suite of EBVs, and then I'd normally, if I knew the group, come back the second time a bit later and then put those EBVs on a search engine and teach them how to use the search engine and make sure that they're driving down the right driveway and how.
Yeah.
And so.
And I've done the same with some of the groups, but it's a time thing.
It's a time thing. So we're really cognizant of that, and I think MLA is really cognizant of that too. And the sheep one was great, that you just handball them to Lifetime U, and some of those other programs was done. In the cattle one, we need to be thinking, and I know Keely's thinking very strongly about what's next and what do people do next, because you can't just drop them with a suite of EBVs and some good ideas.
Chris and Karis, thank you very much. Chris, you just gave us a very small snapshot of the day. What are some of the practical skills or introductions to practical skills that you'd be planning to have participants undertake on the day?
Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, it's a curly one. So Chris did mention, Chris did mention that the condition scoring practical is no longer part of the workshop. And I think that's where your question's coming from a little bit. So from a practical perspective, there's still livestock there. It will only be the selection and using visual and data to make your selection decisions, and a discussion base around stock, because we find that producers definitely get more comfortable, and that's where you've seen them open up at previous BredWell FedWells. From a practical perspective, other than that, everything else that they were learning before is still in it, if that helps.
I guess, and I'm speaking completely off the cuff here, hoping that, you know, that process we did with Salo without EBVs and then go, hey, you've just bid up on the one with the lowest 400-day growth, that's a great fun thing, and there's no reason why we can't continue that, but we just couldn't fit two going out and coming back twice. We lost people and lost the momentum, so we've had to just do one. And of course, lifetime use, so many people have done lifetime use.
Yeah, just to build on that too, there was a really long discussion with the review panel around condition scoring and whether we include it as a let's teach them how to do it or not. And we landed where we did because of a few things, but especially some comments that came from the people who were more around adult learning and the capability building skill set on the review panel. They were just very conscious that we can't actually teach them to body condition score in a day. So all you're doing is an awareness, but they were leaving feeling competent. So we needed to work that out. So instead, what we're saying is, why is condition scoring important? If, you know, this is what it is. If you want to understand how, here's where you to go to learn that, so that they do it and they learn it properly.
It was tricky too, because you'd ask the host can we have some animals with variation, and they go, no worries, and they put 10 fat heifers and they're all 4-score. They go, oh, this is going to be tricky. This is what a 4-score one looks like. Yeah, anyway.
I work a lot with pastoralists. How have you got modules in here that you've adopted for those people in the pastoral zone?
Yeah, so we're still at the moment working out, we're working out how many times we split it up. So at the moment, we've just got the general sheep, beef and the structure. How many regionalised versions of that we have will be worked out next. What did come down and came out of all of the engagement that we did, that the current BredWell FedWell had some challenges around being easy to, or it wasn't very regionalised or couldn't be localised easily, and you were really reliant on the deliverer knowing that that area that they were presenting in. And it has guided how we have developed a few of the activities, so that the conversations being had and the written activities are still able to be done no matter where you are. So with the feed supply gap chart, for example, that's fill it out yourself so that they get their exact region and specifics. So we can make it a little bit more localised easier and across the board. So it's still got that, I guess, no variability. We want it to be uniform and a program that is, I'm not sure how to say it, but we want to make sure that the program is uniform across, the messages coming across are the same. If that makes sense. Yeah. It doesn't. I've rambled there. I'm sorry.
Any other questions?
Sorry I missed most of your presentation, so if this question is off track, then just shut me down. How do we ensure that the material is being updated with current research projects? Because we've got PDS that Helke's leading, and we've got 2 other current projects on heifers, just as examples, that are collecting data that's appropriate, and the pathway for that material to come in a appropriate time and appropriate quality. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's a great question, Wayne, and we didn't cover it. So we're, from a Schuster's consulting perspective, when we've took this over, one of the first tasks was actually sourcing where all of the information that was currently being delivered came from and mapping that out. So we started there and then built from there what are the resources that we're aware of that are available to use for the development of the content, but also to guide participants to after. So that got mapped out, and then we sent it to the review panel as our technical experts. We're really leaning on them to be the ones that know what else is out there. So we're waiting to receive that back from them. We do need a process and a pathway to continue that, to make sure that we are continually getting, I guess, the R&D that backs up the messages out there. It is challenging, especially because the workshop is, the messages that are coming out of it are they're quite foundation knowledge. It's why use breeding values, why have a breeding objective, why feed your animals. So a lot of the research doesn't change, so we're not needing a huge amount of R&D to come in, and other than new traits, essentially. But yeah, we do need a pathway. At the moment, that would be emailing the project coordinator, so it'd be emailing Peter Schuster.
Okay, thank you so much. That was fantastic, Chris and Karis. I really appreciate it.